There's something about the iPhone 18 Pro that I think most people are missing. Everyone is looking for the obvious stuff: a faster chip, a better camera, maybe a cleaner screen. Fine, we expect all of that, but the interesting changes are happening much deeper inside the phone, and one of them could actually change the internal design of the iPhone for the first time in years. Not the outside, the inside. And if Apple gets it right, it could affect heat, battery space, AI performance, even the camera system. We'll get to that one. Because first, there's a change on the front that sounds simple, but technically, it's anything but simple. Feature 1, Face ID, could start disappearing under the screen. You already know Apple wants a cleaner display. That part isn't interesting. The interesting part is how Apple could do it. The iPhone 18 Pro generation has repeatedly been connected with under-display Face ID development. Now, don't picture a completely invisible selfie camera just yet. That's not the important part. The bigger challenge is hiding the infrared Face ID hardware, because Face ID doesn't just take a picture of your face. It uses infrared light. A dot projector throws thousands of invisible points onto your face. An infrared camera reads that depth information. And now Apple has a problem. If those sensors move underneath the OLED panel, that light has to travel through the display itself. Twice. Once going out, once coming back. That means the OLED structure can interfere with the signal. Brightness layers, pixel density, display materials, all of that matters. So Apple can't just place the Face ID system under the screen and say, done. The display itself may need specially engineered areas that allow more infrared light through. And here's the interesting part. If Apple solves this properly, Dynamic Island could become much less dependent on physical hardware. Right now, part of its size exists because there are real sensors underneath it. But if most Face ID hardware disappears under the panel, Dynamic Island could become mostly software. You start music, it appears. You start a timer, it expands. Nothing is happening, it shrinks away. That would make the front of the iPhone feel cleaner without Apple completely removing the idea of Dynamic Island. And honestly, that makes more sense than killing Dynamic Island after spending years building software around it. But there's one test Apple absolutely has to pass: speed. If under-display Face ID takes even half a second longer, you'll notice. Maybe not once. But unlock your phone 100 times a day? Now it gets annoying. So the real upgrade isn't Face ID under the screen. The real upgrade is, can Apple hide it without making it worse? That's the part I'd watch. Now the second change is even more hidden. And this one is much more important than another benchmark score. Feature 2, the A20 Pro may change how the chip and memory are built. You're going to hear a lot about 2 nanometer. A 20 Pro, faster CPU, faster GPU. Okay, we know that story. But there's another detail that is way more interesting. Apple's next generation chip packaging has been linked with something called WMCM, wafer level multi-chip module. Sounds boring. It's not, because this could change the way the processor and memory are packaged inside the phone. Traditionally, the processor and memory still have physical packaging and routing between them. WMCM allows multiple components to be integrated much more tightly at the wafer level. In simple words, the chip and RAM can sit closer together. Less distance, shorter connections, potentially lower power use, better data movement, and possibly less board space. That last part is important, because inside an iPhone, every single millimeter matters. Apple is fighting for space between the battery, the cameras, the logic board, the modem, the cooling system, and everything else. So imagine Apple saves even a small amount of internal space around the main processor package. What does Apple do with it? Larger battery, better cooling, more camera hardware? We don't know yet. But that's why this packaging change matters. It isn't just about performance. It could change the internal layout. And there's another reason Apple may want memory closer to the processor. AI. Local AI models are hungry, not only for processing power, for memory bandwidth. The faster the chip can move data between the processor and RAM, the better these workloads can behave. So when people say iPhone 18 Pro gets a faster a 20 Pro, that's actually the least interesting way to describe it. The real question is whether Apple changes the whole relationship between the processor and memory, because that could improve efficiency without simply making the CPU run harder. And there's a big difference between those two. A chip running harder gives you speed. A better architecture can give you speed without as much heat. Which one would you rather have? I know my answer. Now let's move to the camera. And no, I'm not going to talk about another megapixel increase. There's something much more useful. Feature 3, the main camera could physically change its aperture. This is one of the upgrades I think people will understand immediately once they actually use it. A future iPhone 18 Pro has been linked in analyst reporting with a variable aperture main camera. And this is not software pretending to change aperture. This is physical, mechanical. Think of the aperture like the pupil in your eye. Dark room, your pupil gets larger. Bright sunlight, it gets smaller. Phone cameras normally don't have much of that freedom. The aperture is usually fixed. So Apple relies heavily on shutter speed, ISO, and computational photography. A variable aperture changes that. Imagine the camera opens wider in low light. More light reaches the sensor, potentially cleaner images, lower ISO, less noise. Then you step outside, bright sunlight, the aperture closes down. Now Apple has more control over exposure. But here's the part people don't usually talk about. Depth of field. Modern phone sensors are getting bigger. That's good for image quality. But bigger sensors also make close-up focus harder. Try this sometime. Take a close photo of a plate of food, or a document, or a small product. You might notice the center is sharp, but the edges or nearby objects fall out of focus faster than you expected. A smaller aperture can increase depth of field. That means more of the image can stay sharp. This could be especially useful for product shots, documents, and close photography. And video could benefit too. Right now, when lighting changes, the phone often adjusts exposure electronically. Shutter speed changes, ISO changes. Sometimes that affects motion. A variable aperture gives the camera another physical tool to control exposure. That is much more camera-like. But there's a downside: moving parts. More complexity, more space, potentially more cost. So this could also be one reason the camera area keeps getting larger. Would you accept a slightly bigger camera bump if the camera actually behaved more like a real camera? That's a much better question than asking whether you want 50 or 60 megapixels. Now, feature number 4 is probably the least exciting on paper, but it could affect the phone every hour you're outside. Feature 4, Apple's second-generation modem, could matter more than the CPU. Apple has been slowly moving toward its own cellular modem technology. And by the iPhone 18 Pro generation, a newer Apple modem could become much more important. Why? Because the modem is one of the parts constantly using power, especially on 5G, and especially when signal is weak. Here's what happens. Your phone loses a strong signal. The modem starts working harder. It looks for a better connection. It communicates with the tower. Power use increases. Heat can increase. Battery falls fast. You've probably seen it while traveling. Your battery drains much faster than normal even though you're barely using the phone. That's often the cellular connection working hard in the background. So if Apple's newer modem becomes more efficient, that could improve the phone in a way no benchmark can show properly. You're on 5G all day. Same apps, same brightness, same usage, but you get home with 15 or 20% more battery. That's useful. There's also another reason Apple wants to own this part: integration. Apple already designs the main chip. It controls iOS. It controls power management. It controls more and more wireless hardware. Now imagine the modem is designed around the rest of the phone instead of being another major third-party component Apple has to work around. That gives Apple much more control over when radios wake up, how long they stay active, how they share data, how aggressively they use power. That could improve efficiency. But this is also where Apple has no room to mess up. People will forgive a benchmark being 5% slower. They will not forgive bad signal. If Qualcomm gives you stronger reception and Apple's own modem doesn't, nobody cares that Apple designed it in-house. So the modem has to match or beat the experience people already expect. And now we get to the part a lot of people are waiting for. The pre-order update. Here's where I'd be careful. Apple has not given me a live official iPhone 18 Pro pre-order date that I can verify in this chat, so I'm not going to make up an exact Friday and call it confirmed. But Apple's launch pattern gives us a very clear idea of what to watch. For major Pro iPhones, Apple usually announces the phone in September. Pre-orders typically open on the Friday after the event. Retail availability usually starts about 1 week later. So the important window for iPhone 18 Pro is still September 2026, unless Apple changes its normal schedule. Now here's where it gets interesting. If Apple announces the phone early in the week, watch the following Friday. That's normally where pre-orders would land. Then the first deliveries would usually follow the next Friday. But until Apple publishes the exact dates, treat any specific pre-order day as expected, not confirmed. And there's another thing to watch this year: availability. Because some of these upgrades are not simple. 2nm class chips, new packaging, under-display Face ID hardware, Potential camera changes. If production yields are tight on even one of those parts, Apple could have plenty of phones announced but not enough phones available. And that creates the worst kind of pre-order. The one where the website opens you're 5 minutes late and suddenly your delivery date moves 3 weeks. So if you're actually planning to buy the iPhone 18 Pro, I would care about one thing even more than the exact pre-order date. Which models are constrained? Certain colors, higher storage, Pro Max, a new camera configuration, that can matter more than the official launch day. Because an iPhone can technically launch on Friday while the version you want is already pushed into October. And now think about the 4 upgrades we just talked about. None of them are simple cosmetic changes. Under display, Face ID affects the display. WMCM packaging affects the processor and memory. Variable aperture affects the physical camera. A newer modem affects cellular hardware. That means Apple could be changing 4 completely different parts of the phone at the same time. And that's why the iPhone 18 Pro could be more interesting than a normal yearly refresh. Not because one feature is huge, because the hidden architecture could change in several places at once. The front becomes cleaner. The processor and memory get packed differently. The camera becomes more mechanical. The modem becomes more Apple-controlled. That's a very different kind of upgrade. And notice what I haven't talked about. A new color, a new wallpaper, a slightly brighter display, another AI button, because none of those would make me spend Pro money. These might. Now here's the question I keep coming back to. Which of these would you actually notice after 6 months? The cleaner Face ID area? Maybe. The variable aperture camera? Definitely, if you shoot a lot. A newer modem. You may never even know it's there. You'll just notice the phone lasts longer on 5G. And the new chip packaging? You probably won't see it at all. But if the phone stays cooler, has more room for battery, and handles local AI better, then that hidden change could end up being the most important one. And that's what makes the iPhone 18 Pro interesting. The biggest upgrade may not be something Apple can show in a beautiful product shot. It may be buried under the display inside the camera or underneath the logic board. And those are exactly the changes I'd watch before deciding whether this phone is actually worth the upgrade.